Hello teacups, what's brewing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for being here. Today is part 2 of my working abroad series that I'm doing. Part 1 is available, I'll put it down in the link somewhere, but it's on channel, probably the video before this one. And what this is just answering some questions. I put up a post a little while ago asking people to ask me anything they wanted to know about my experiences abroad. Now, I'm not going to tell you absolutely anything, but in broad strokes, I'm happy to discuss it. So I split the questions I got into kind of 3 areas. The last video was more about the emotional side and the motivations and my feelings about living in different places. So if you're interested in that, please check the video out. Today is going to be looking at more practical concerns, asking about sort of getting here and living here and how I manage here. And then the third one is probably going to be all about finances. So these questions aren't really in any particular order, they're just the order I wrote them down in. But the first question I have here is, what kind of degree do you need? Now, I've been doing this for quite a while, so this answer has changed a little, but it does change depending on the type of job you're going for and the country you're going for it in. Some countries have looser requirements than others. So for example, in my very first job that I went to, it was a government-sponsored program, and the aim of the program was more grassroots internationalism than it was particularly teaching. You just happened to be a language assistant while you did this. So they weren't too worried about what kind of qualifications you had before. Now, my undergrad is in English, so for some people, okay, well, you're a native speaker, you have a degree in English, good enough, and they put you in. And they didn't worry too much about experience either, because it wasn't really the aim of the program. And as I said, you were an assistant in the class, not the main teacher. So that had a lot more flexibility built in. So it was a case of going and impressing an interview. I don't know how it works now, and I know it didn't work this way for people coming from other countries. I know in America, I was talking to someone and they'd been to just a big hall and there were multiple setups for interviewing people on the spot. In England, when you went for the JET program interview, you had to go to London to the Japanese embassy, and it was quite intimidating. But it was more important you did well there. So their prerequisites were literally that you had a degree of some kind. Could have been a degree in needlepoint, but so long as you had it, because the visa you needed to be able to work demanded that you be at the level of specialist, and to prove you were a specialist, you had to have a degree. So that's generally the bare minimum. If you have, in America, you have something like an associate's degree. I'm not entirely sure what that is, but it seems to not be the bachelor's. If you're going and trying to get a visa with an associate's degree, chances are you're going to run into problems. I don't know every country and their prerequisites, but usually when I've been on the side of interviewing people for international positions, that's something that my colleagues who are in the HR version have said, no, we can't do that. So I think a bachelor's is the minimum. Now, with it being a minimum, you just having a bachelor's in anything isn't going to get you a huge amount of choice. Some countries will accept it, but if you want to go for anything more than an entry-level position, and you want to get into a good school, an accredited school, you're going to need more. Depending on the level you teach will depend what this is. As I say, being a specialist tends to be the wording. So if you're teaching in secondary, for example, or older students, maybe you're teaching pre-university or something like that, having a history in your subject, whether it's attached to teaching or not, is usually okay. So if you're going in and you're teaching, I don't know, business studies, and your degree is in business, it's okay. However, not every educational board will accept that. Sorry, the call to prayer has just started and it just seems louder than usual today. Apologies if it's disruptive. So not every educational board will accept that. Some, like the Middle Eastern boards, tend to be quite strict, and not every school will accept it. They want to attract a good quality of teacher, and that means having certain prerequisites. Now, depending on the school, it may be qualified teacher status, they may be looking at your amount of experience, they may be saying, okay, we teach Montessori, we want you to have experience in this. The school will depend, but in terms of straight visas, a lot of educational boards in the Middle East say that, okay, well, your degree has to match what you're teaching, and if you're teaching younger students, it has to be in primary education, or it has to be in whatever specialist you're actually doing. It's not the case for every country, but it's one of the reasons the Middle East can be harder to break into, because the packages are good, but the prerequisites for the educational officers are stricter. Connected to this question kind of is, do you need to take a new exam board in each country? Like a new exam with a new board in each country? No, you don't. You go and you apply for a job using the qualifications you have, but the schools you apply to might differ depending on what qualifications you have. So particularly when you have a country like America or Canada, where there's not one just national educational system the way there is in the UK. For England, for example, if someone said to me, okay, we need experience in English national curriculum, that would go all across England. Whereas in the States, each state have their own qualifications and their own curriculum focus. I'm not hugely knowledgeable about this, so apologies if I am misrepresenting the American educational system. But as I understand it, different states have different boards and you qualify for the state rather than the country. Now, when you apply for, let's say you go for an American international school, they may have a certain state that they want you to be qualified in. And in which case they may say, no, you need to have this test. Or they may look and they may say, okay, you've got a great record within your state. We have these differences, but we're an international curriculum, so it's fine, come work for us. It's very dependent from school to school how they're willing to take that. An example I can give you for that is actually, I have never worked in a British school. All of my teaching experience has been abroad. So I'm frequently in a weird position where my experience is not British enough for certain schools, even though I'm British. So it can be a funny thing, but also your experience can play a huge part in this. Because my experience is all international, they know they can trust in certain things. They know that I've been teaching in accredited schools, like 7-8 years. So I've got a pretty good idea of what I'm getting into. They know I'm very unlikely to do a midnight flight where I come in, they go to the trouble of getting me a visa, and then 2 months later I cry and go home, because working abroad isn't for everybody. So there are things they can stack against, oh, she has experience in the area that we're teaching, she knows what it's like to do this, versus you don't have exactly the educational history we're looking for. But how willing they are to be flexible on that is going to be massively different from school to school, and depending on what experience you're bringing to the table. If you're saying, I don't have the qualifications you're looking for, I don't have the experience you're looking for, and I'm not familiar with your board, that's a harder sell. I should at this point also mention and be really careful, if you're looking into working internationally, be super careful of the people who are willing to take you with anything, because it should just be a bit of a red flag. You'll notice those things, and there's certain wording in certain ads where you're like, oh, and you make a note of it because it's not one you should take seriously. If it sounds like it's too good to be true, it frequently is. So if they're saying, no, we'll take you and we'll pay you this massive salary and it's no qualifications, take it about as seriously as you would if you were doing it at home, which is to say, be careful. But to drag myself back on point, what I was really saying is no, they want to see that you have a relevant degree for what you're teaching. So in that case, qualification as a teacher is better. You can access higher salaries. It's going to be easy for you. It's going to be easier for you, to apply for a range of countries because some are stricter than the others. But generally speaking, your applications will go to schools looking for your expertise. My next question, do you teach in private schools? Generally, yes. As I said, I started with the JET program, which was a government program. So technically, when I was in Japan, I was employed by the prefectural government and then placed into a school because every teacher is a government employee in that case. But mostly it is private schools. Now, there are government programs and initiatives to get people into the equivalent of state schools in other countries. But generally speaking, the people who are looking for international teachers tend to be private schools because they can afford to hire you, and the curriculum that they offer is more weighted towards international focuses. And if I'm going to be entirely frank, in some countries, depending on the economic outlook, the people who can afford to have international teachers send their kids to private school. Can teachers bring families, or is it for singles? This really depends on the family. Some people might have started traveling as a single and then met somebody and developed a family through this experience, and then those people sometimes travel together. I've worked with many families who have come in and both the parents in the family have been hired into the school in different positions, and then their kids will go to the school. Not everyone is willing to do that with kids specifically, because once they settle into a place, they want their child to have a consistent experience, but it can be a really great opportunity. For example, a lot of the schools tend to discount the fees or give entirely free places for children in very good schools if their parents are hired by the school. The school also know that once a child is at their school, the chance of the parents staying for longer is better, and that's a better investment for them than just having one contract and then being done. But that does rather assume that the school is going to go as expected and it's going to be a good school, and that's not a consistent thing. Sometimes you get to a school and you just think, oh, I've made a mistake. Luckily, not all my schools have been that way. But after some time, you start to see things maybe you don't like as much about it, and you decide that's not where you want to be long term. And that's quite normal. You just get to know things a bit more. And that's very much how long is a piece of string. You don't know what your tolerance for that is going to be. But some places will welcome families because they consider it more stable and they consider it a longer term investment. That being said, the government and the educational offices can be very interfere. English is the thing I am paid for. Can interfere quite heavily with this, because in Saudi, for example, when you're given a visa that you can fulfill because you're given a set number, and this was part of the problem with me staying a little bit longer here in Saudi, is that so long as I'm here, they can't release the visa to get another teacher in. But some of those visas specify these are visas for married people, these are visas for single people. So sometimes in advertisements for jobs, they'll say we have a single visa to fulfill, or sometimes it can even go down to gender, like we can hire a single male teacher, we can hire a single female teacher, and in which case that's out of their hands, they can only hire singles. Another thing, in my new job, this hasn't been the case here because my next door neighbor who was here with her family, she was hired for the school and then she sponsored her husband and her child to come over. So the school was her sponsor and she was their sponsor. In my new school, that is not possible. So a male teacher can come in and can sponsor his wife, but a wife cannot come in and sponsor her husband. It has to be male first because that's generally how it goes. So it's actually illegal for a woman to do that. So if you are applying as a female and you want to bring your family, then you have to apply as a pair and the school has to hire both of you so you can have your individual visas. Otherwise, they can't accommodate it. And these legalities are something you really have to be aware of when you're doing your applications. Okay, the next question I have is, what subjects do you teach? And I've got a couple of secondary questions, one of which made me laugh a little bit. What subjects do you teach? I've worked as a specialist subject teacher in English specifically, and I've also worked as a generalist. I'm currently a generalist, which means that I teach multiple subjects, but all in the medium of English. And that was one of the secondary questions. Do you teach them in English or the local language? I actually teach all of my subjects in English, so frequently the draw of these international programs and what makes it worth the insane amount of money people have to pay to get into these international programs tends to be the fact that it is immersive. So when I'm a generalist, I usually teach English, math, science. I'm not actually teaching science next year. I'm just doing English and math, which makes me a little bit sad because science is fun, but they like specialists into those subjects in my new school, and that's fair enough. I'm just a bit sad about it. But generally speaking, these programs are immersive, and so you don't have to know the local language before you get there in order to teach it. And actually, it is quite actively discouraged in the classroom to have their native language because you want them to be communicating in English. That's the point of going to the trouble of hiring you to begin with. I did have a question that confused me a little. When the kids speak Urdu, do you understand? I have never worked in a location where Urdu is the primarily spoken language. I currently work in Saudi Arabia, which means their native language is Arabic. But generally speaking, it depends on the country and how well I've had a grasp on the language. With Arabic, not really. I will say, of all the places I've lived, I probably know the least Arabic, and that's something I really do want to change next year. There are different types of Arabic. A lot of the courses and things you do are frequently Egyptian Arabic, and apparently Egyptian Arabic is a little bit different. But next year, I think I'm going to look into more formal lessons because this year was a bit of a mess and COVID and all the rest of it. So I was on work from home a lot, but I would like to learn it more than I have, certainly. I have a basic grasp of a few words. So sometimes you hear a word go in the classroom, you're like, hey, sit down. No, sit down. Because you can feel an argument brewing, but it's as much kind of tone and body language as it is the words. I will say, however, that learning the language can be really useful outside of the classroom setting. Like obviously, if there's an emergency and a kid runs up to you, it's good to be able to get the details quickly, but it will be really helpful with your co-workers. Now, in my school, many of them speak English, but there's some, particularly in like the Arabic Islamic departments, because they still have Arabic and Islamic lessons in their native language. Just the academic and the specialist subjects, academic subjects that I take, I should say, like it's not an academic subject, and the specialist subjects like music and art and PE and things are done by international teachers. But I find if you want to fit in more and you want to smooth the way a little bit, even if you're making a complete mess of it, the people you work with will usually really appreciate you trying and just make a mess of it, but attempt it, and they'll be very welcoming of the effort. So I would say it's worth learning some for sure. Next question, we've got how free are you to design lessons, and are there strict guidelines on what you discuss? It depends where you are, and how much of an issue it's going to be really depends what level you teach as well. Like for example, the guidelines in China versus the guidelines in Saudi versus the guidelines in Japan, they're very different. Some things can be sensitive in a way you don't necessarily realize, but generally speaking, when it comes to the school planning and what you're following for the syllabus, it will already have those sensibilities built into it. So if there's a topic we should avoid, we probably won't be showcasing it in our curriculum. Now, that doesn't mean I haven't tripped up a couple of times. I remember in Japan, just not realizing this, I had a friend who was working in Okinawa, and she was also a graduate student, because this is going way back. But for her master's program, she wanted to get some interview papers filled in by Japanese students from all over Japan. And because she was working in Okinawa, in the section of the interview where you had to specify some biographical information, it asked, are you international, are you Japanese, or are you Okinawan? And they didn't like that question at all. Like that didn't go well, because it implied that Okinawa was separate from Japan when actually it's part of Japan, and apparently that's a little bit sensitive. And I just didn't know that at the time, and I had to explain, no. My friend is working in Okinawa, and she's trying to see if there's a difference between whatever it was she was studying between Okinawan students and Japanese students, which is why she's asking for the clarification, and please don't be offended. But I was quite shocked because I didn't realize that was a sensitive issue. So, sorry, I don't know if that picked up on camera, but a really sus noise just happened outside, and I was just like, okay, my gate's closed. We're gonna just keep our fingers crossed here. What was I actually saying? Oh, Okinawa. So sometimes you can come across issues that you didn't realize were sensitive and you just have to be careful. And other times you just have to use your common sense. We're not going to have anything in our curriculum here in Saudi that they'd rather we didn't discuss. But the general attitude towards it is, if you're not sure, please just don't say anything, because it's easier to not say anything than it is to say the wrong thing. And I'm fairly okay with dealing with that. I don't have any religious affiliations, so they're not going to be doing anything that's against my religious beliefs because I don't have any. So that's not going to be an issue. And that's actually been true in other areas. When I worked in Indonesia, I worked in a Christian school, and I also don't have any Christian affiliations, really. I went to a Roman Catholic school when I was a kid, but I don't have any religious beliefs that I hold internal to myself. So when I had to lead them in prayer in the morning, I was like, okay, this is just a thing we have to do, and I'll be respectful. Same really goes for Saudi. But it does come up occasionally, just in the way of, okay, for example, recently my kids were learning about volcanoes, and they had to just go and research, and some of them asked, they were like, are there volcanoes in Saudi? And I was like, that's a really good question, why don't we research that? And they came back a couple of days later and they told me about them. So apparently there were some volcanic eruptions in like the 1200s or something around Mecca, because there are lava fields, there's evidence of lava fields there. And it got quite close to the city, and obviously Mecca is the holy city. And so the boys are talking about that, and how we talk a little bit about how it's not an active volcano anymore, but you know, it's not a dead volcano either. And we looked at how close, based on the fields, it got to Mecca, and I said, oh, we were really lucky, no one seems to have gotten hurt, nothing seems to have been destroyed. And the little one looked at me and he says, Miss, no, we weren't lucky, it's because we have God. And I said, that's a really good point, thank you for sharing. And we moved on with the day. You know, so in those moments where you could like push that button, just choose not to. You know, like there are going to be moments when you could make a big deal of something, and just don't. Like, I would say just use your common sense and don't. Sometimes there are things that you're just not aware are going to be issues until it becomes an issue. But generally speaking, with a little bit of experience, you just learn how to navigate those moments. Are you able to vote in the country you work in or in your home country? I am a resident, not a citizen, of the countries that I work in, so I don't have voting rights there. I do have voting rights back in the UK. You just have to register as an overseas voter, and you can send in a postal vote, but you just have to arrange it. And I think you're not eligible for like local elections, but you are for the big ones. It's just a case of going into the .gov website, has a lot of information on that, on how to register as a voter overseas, and you can figure that out. Someone had a question about moving or shipping your stuff. They gave an example. They were like, I hear Japan has white glove service where they'll pack everything. White gloves in Japan are quite funny because you see them in very specific situations. It's a way to show you're official. So you'll see train conductors wearing them, and taxi drivers wear them as well. So it was just funny when you said white glove, I was like, oh, because it brought back some big memories. But I don't know what it's like to ship my stuff, because I don't ship my stuff. You probably saw, I did a vlog not long ago of me going back to the UK to sort out some of my visa stuff for my next job. And at the beginning of it, I show a picture of my suitcase. That is the suitcase I take. I don't ship other things, because generally speaking, when I'm going from apartment to apartment or from place to place, those places are furnished. So the basics I need in my apartment will already be there. And for the cost of either storing or shipping these things and the trouble it involves to do that internationally, it's not worth it to me. So I don't bother. All I really need is a suitcase, and then anything new I need to get when I get there, I can get when I get there and save myself the trouble. Frequently when you ship, things can be delayed, things can be lost, particularly now, but it's a lot of trouble unless you're really, really attached to an item, and the fact is I'm really not. So I know that the bare minimums of what I need in terms of furniture will already be there because they're furnished, and I don't worry about the rest. So I pack my clothes up, I try and get a supply of medications before I go, and I might pack one or two things like my makeup, stuff like that, but other than that, that's how I turn up in a country. Okay, that's all the questions I have here. So thank you everybody who posed a question in the comments for me to answer. As I said, the next one will be on finances. So if anybody does have any questions on that topic, feel free to also put them below and I will try and include them in the next video. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being here and I will see you next time. Bye bye everybody.